You're very welcome. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation, and we are absolutely delighted on behalf of MW Advocate and the Fibrus to host this a fantastic collection of people who've joined us for today's Zoom call. We're going to look at the issues around the digital divide, the inequity that does exist in certain parts of Northern Ireland and elsewhere across these islands, and the importance of connectivity in a post-COVID era and the times that we're living through. But rather than me rabbit on too much at the start of all of this, I'm going to ask our guests to each introduce themselves over a couple of minutes, and I'm going to start with Conal Henry from Fibrus in the top left. If you could take it from there, Conal. Thank you.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks very much, and welcome to the call, everybody. As Brent says, I'm Conal Henry. I am founder and chairman of a company called Fibrus, and I suppose for the purposes of this conversation, I'm the infrastructure guy. I think from a lot of the other people on the call, you'll hear about the benefits and the social and economic transformational impact of top quality broadband. I see it as my job and the job of our company, Fibrus, to actually get that infrastructure that delivers that built. My own background is I was founding chief executive of a company called eNet, which is still the biggest competitive fibre provider in the south of Ireland, and has also given birth to a company called National Broadband Ireland, which is delivering the national broadband plan in the south of Ireland. So between eNet and NBI, their fibre network will probably be, we'll cover all 26 counties and upwards of 700,000 homes. So that's the company that we found and we sold about 2 years ago. And we've set up Fibrus to build fibre networks in rural and regional Northern Ireland. We have a plan to bring fibre to somewhere between 25 and 30%, hopefully, of the homes in Northern Ireland. And crucially, these are the homes that don't have broadband. A lot of the broadband investment in Northern Ireland to date has been overlapping. It's been in the cities, it's been in Belfast and Derry and the suburbs, the commuter belt around those cities. We're targeting rural and regional areas. We're looking to build in areas that haven't received broadband already. We think it's transformational for rural economies, but we're just the infrastructure guys. I'm not an economic forecaster. We're just guys that build the big fat pipe that people much cleverer than us can send really interesting, exciting things down. So that's Conal. That's me and Fibrus.
You're the facilitator.
That's correct. Yeah.
For all the good stuff. Okay, brilliant. Thanks a million, Conal. Lisa, could you tell us a little bit about this from a community and a business point of view, and the context in which you're coming to this discussion?
Yeah, and it's very interesting. If you'd asked me about the context, we come to this discussion from a business and the community perspective, let's say 3 months ago, I would have said, yep, that digital access is an important issue for some of our member organisations, and what we've traditionally seen in business in the community. Sorry, just by way of background, at business in the community we work with about 230, 240 companies across Northern Ireland and try to help match their skills and resources with community and societal issues, with all with a view to trying to build a more sustainable province right across Northern Ireland. But if you'd asked me, yes, a couple of months ago, what does this look like from a business in the community membership perspective, I probably would have said, yep, it's an issue that's of interest to some of our member organisations, and it would be to be quite blunt, it would be the obvious ones. It would be the ITs, particularly around the communication side of things, and that would be something that's strategically important to them from whenever it comes to how they engage with the community. Now we are operating in a completely different playing field, where I'd say this is a critical issue to all of our member organisations. Coronavirus has completely shifted the perspective from digital divide being something that impacts some organisations and of interest to some organisations to one that impacts all of them, because we're moving to a place now where job design is going to be centred around digital access and ability to be able to work digitally and from home. We see that coming from a lot of our member organisations, where they want to be able to move to a much more agile way of working over the next year or two. That's very definitely in their plans. But they can't do that if some of their employees don't have the access to the broadband and the digital access that they need. That will mean that they as organisations can't function efficiently anymore. So all of a sudden it's become a resilience issue for all organisations. Hugely, it's become a sustainability issue. And actually, whenever you drill right down into this, it's a quality issue for all organisations, their employees, and potentially, their families, etc. And I know Kate will give much more testimony to this than I would, but it's become a much more prevalent and pointed issue for organisations over the last 2 months than, to be very frank about it, it might have been 3 or 4 months ago.
Okay, that's great, Lisa. And actually, that word you use, resilience, that's an important way of looking at this. Actually, and it's something I probably hadn't considered up until now. But if Belfast is to be a resilient city and Northern Ireland a resilient region, this is the inclusive connectivity. It plays a big part in that.
Yeah, and I know we're getting into more of a conversation later, but we cannot build a more resilient economy without equal access to digital. But anyway, I'll
come back to resilience as a theme. Thanks, Lisa. Kate Clifford from the Rural Community Network. You probably have heard some stuff which chimes with you very strongly already, Kate, but give us a bit of background just about you and your organisation and what way you're coming to this conversation.
So Rural Community Network was established almost 30 years ago now, and it is a network of community groups that are established in rural areas of populations of less than 500, or less than 1,000, including dispersed rural communities, which are settlement types that are recognised in Northern Ireland as being specific to this region as dispersed settlements. They wouldn't have a centre, they might have one community centre or a church, but they don't necessarily have a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, which would define most built-up areas or most settlement types. The reality, I suppose, for us, and I do apologise, folks, I am living in a rural area with really, really rubbish broadband. So you'll see my connection comes and goes, and it is quite unstable. Yeah. And everybody in the house at present is off their internet. Like, we've shut everything down in order that I can take this call today. So we sit with an upload speed of about 1.79. I'm about 2 miles from the nearest box. And I have a download speed of 0.89. On a good day, I can get 2.1 and we can run Netflix, but most evenings we don't. And just before lockdown, we had asked or encouraged a number of groups, a number of providers to come out and to talk us through what our options would be. People, I lost the will to live because I had no idea what they were talking about. And I'm an intelligent human being, but I just got completely lost in the technology and the stuff that Connell can do, or I just can't. I have no notion what that is. We brought BT out and they laughed at our broadband speed, helpfully.
What part of where are you in the country?
So I'm off the Glenshane Pass. I'm in Northern Ireland. I'm in Mahara. So I'm just off the Glenshane Pass, about 2 miles outside of Mahara town itself. But I sit on the end of a line. So my next door neighbour gets good broadband, not great broadband. He gets good broadband, better than us. And you can see I'm jealous. So he gets better broadband than us because his broadband comes from the left-hand side, whereas ours comes from the right-hand side. So it's just the difference in where our connection comes from. But we both pay the same BT broadband bill. So I suppose the issue for me in terms of all of this, in terms of go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Carry on. It's okay. Sorry.
So the issue for us in terms of, we have 260 member groups based right throughout rural Northern Ireland. And in having conversations with them, it is the ones who are furthest from the technology, the ones that sit at the end of the broadband line, the ones who are paying additional costs for satellite, who are the ones that are the hardest to reach, and they will be the last to reach. And in conversations that I've had with some members of this group over the last few weeks, I suppose the conversation that I'd like to say is that the poverty for digital poverty comes in 4 guises that we have recognised, and particularly that has become almost exacerbated because of the COVID and the reliance on digital and the reliance on having meetings like this. So we're saying the broadband availability is one element of it. The broadband affordability is the next element of it. So the ability to get connected at an affordable rate. The capacity to get online and to understand when you're online about how that works. And then the hardware technology. So there are 4 elements to the digital divide, but fundamental to that it does not exist in very many areas. And where it does exist, it's patchy. So we still have in Northern Ireland massive not spots. Yeah. So we have areas where people are not connected and can't get connected, or they sit like us with some connection, but that's really limited. The difficulty for us is that as we face the COVID pandemic, where people are isolated and they're working from home, though there are whole segments of the community that will be disadvantaged because they will experience all 4 types of digital exclusion. So that will be they don't have broadband, they can't afford broadband, they don't have the capacity to get on, and they don't have the hardware to get on. And I suppose for me, the protection and the impetus to get this sorted, to get this issue sorted, comes with a unique piece of legislation that we have in Northern Ireland called the Rural Needs Act. And the Rural Needs Act says that you should not be disadvantaged by virtue of where you live. So that Rural Needs Act was brought in 2017. All of our statutory providers are bound by that act. And that act should enable the government to have legislation that ensures that rural areas are not disadvantaged with what I now consider and others consider to be an essential utility. So for me, the digital divide is there, but one of the key parts of addressing the digital divide is about getting people online in the first place and getting them connected. Okay. Then when you look at what the opportunities are from that, it's around the supporting balanced regional development. And in supporting balanced regional development, you support access to services, and all of the equality agendas then can follow through from that.
Okay, those are very practical examples of the impact of the digital divide, and thanks for those insights. It's really, really helpful. It'll help guide the conversation later on. Moving on now, and we are delighted that Lord David Puttnam has been able to give up his time to join today's conversation. He needs no introduction, and his past record speaks for itself, and has given us all so much joy down the years. David, I suppose in typical fashion, you're going to show us a film actually, which describes, so if you introduce us to that whilst I switch to make you the host so that you can share your screen with us. Thanks.
Sure, Brendan. Just a bit of context. I came to live in Westcourt 30 years ago. 5 years ago, a number of us started having discussions. We had a fragile agricultural sector here, had been thriving, but it was a subsidy-based agricultural sector, a lot of insecurity. We were losing young people as soon as they graduated. If they had the points, they did not come back. And we had a 2.5-month tourist season, which was not sustainable in terms of restaurants and hotels. So we were looking at a lot of problems. We decided to take a stab at seeing what would happen if we went digital. So rather than me witter on, this film got put together. Richard, with apologies, it was not intended to be made. So there's a lot of footage in it, which was scrambled together. But we put together a film, and this is how it came about. Okay, Dave.
We always said, let's see if we can create this blueprint, what hasn't been done in rural areas before. So we've been contacted by about 15 towns all over Ireland, from Longford, Dungarvan, Westmeath, Kerry, Galway, Mayo, just saying, we have this empty post office, we have an empty Garda station, they've all been closed down, what can we do with them? So the number one piece of advice is it has to be from the bottom up, it has to be from the community, and gather your community together and see what your strengths are and what can connectivity do for those as well.
I have watched over the last 50 years young people leaving West Cork year after year this is our way of getting these young people back.
If you live in Dublin, London or any other major city, good communication is an essential part of your day-to-day reality. That's just never been the case in West Cork. But all that's going to change.
We have a number of community projects and it's trying to get absolutely everybody thinking digital. So we want everybody thinking, what can you do with that connectivity? How can you connect out with people using it?
Skibbereen is as good a place in the world to actually set up a business. In fact, it'll be a very attractive place for if you're an entrepreneur in Vancouver. There's no reason why now you wouldn't actually consider relocating your business here.
I was out in Dallas before Christmas and there was a guy from Cork there, and he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "From Castlehaven." I said, "The office in Skibbereen." He said, "The digital capital of Ireland." So we don't want to stay the digital capital of Ireland anymore. We want to stay the digital capital of the world.
This is a wonderful, wonderful place to live. The schools are great, the air's great, the environment's great, the food's great. But in the past, young people had to go to the city in order to get the jobs they wanted. That is simply no longer true. So that was 4 years ago. And if you'll bear with me, it's very, very short update because we're now opening Ludgate 2. It'll actually open the early part of next year. So here's just a short intro to Ludgate 2. Whoops, me.
The house is fantastic because of the broadband. We've never had any issues with the hubbing when we've had no internet at home. We've all been able to come to work. So we have all our internal messenger systems on all day long and we've never had an interruption in service. One thing that struck me when we first came here, a number of people from the board came in and were absolutely delighted because we employed young local people. They've stayed in Skibbereen and they're bringing their skills and, you know, their salary and everything else, and they're staying in the local area. They don't have to go to the big city. They don't have to go up to Cork or Dublin or any of these places to get a good quality career.
When I moved to West Cork first, I wished to prove that it was possible to work and live in West Cork. What surprises me working in Ludgate, what continues to surprise me, is just who might come through that door. So as regards the economic impact on the town, the hub has facilitated the employment of more people in the town. It's quite simple. We are now able to make our lives and our employment here in the town and bring our families with us.
Ludgate 2 will be bigger than Ludgate 1 and will absolutely focus, because it's near our school, will focus on the relationship with the school. We're trying to create a seamless pathways, both for professional development for the teachers, to make absolutely sure all the teachers that teach in Skibbereen are very, very well digitally equipped and understand the concepts of blended learning and what we can actually do with digital. It's very, very significant. One last thing is just a slide, literally one, of where we've got to. So we've got 55 paying members, 146 directly created jobs, that there are also some businesses that have moved into town because of the centre. Hot desks enjoyed by 2,500 people to date, and 4 million euros worth contribution to the local economy. This is a success story, and it actually is nothing to do with me on it. It was built by the town. The most important moment was that public meeting where the town took ownership. Prior to that, it was an idea that half a dozen of us had. From that point onwards, it was the town owned it, and that's what we tried to do ever since. And actually, our only interesting problem is squaring the issues of security of the equipment with access and openness. It's a problem we haven't yet solved. But other than that, I think the thing is, I'm delighted with what's involved. I'm sorry, Brendan, I took much longer than should.
That's quite inspirational, actually, and quite appropriate too that we heard a little snippet of Local Hero built into your.
It's the only thing I could get free.
I think that's. I imagine that's what you've become in and around Skibbereen. So thanks very much for that. We're going to move on to Paul Gannon. If you could unmute yourself, Paul, and tell us a little bit about Kainos and the way that you're coming to this conversation today.
I just watched that Local Hero recently. Actually, it was fantastic. What a great film!
Good.
What a great film, absolutely.
Thanks, Paul. It is.
So I work for a company called Kainos. We're headquartered out of Northern Ireland. I sit on the board. We're a FTSE 250 company. We're about 1,800 people globally now. And I guess for us, the listening to all those conversations, we're just in the middle of really absorbing what it means for us as a business. I mean, the first couple of weeks of the crisis back in March, we pretty much moved everybody, all 1,800 people, to home working within about a week. Now that's kind of easy for us because we're a pretty digital savvy company and we're very connected. It wasn't nearly that easy for our customers, many of whom are large government departments and actually a lot of people in the NHS who we do work for. So we spent quite a bit of time helping them move to successfully to home working and giving them access to the systems that they need. And we've been at the heart of a lot of the government response, particularly the NHS response to dealing with COVID from a technology perspective. I don't mean necessarily the controversial app that you've been reading about, but a lot of the other aspects of it. So for us, I think, I think it would be maybe just helpful to share how we feel about what's happened to us 10 weeks on, the impact on our business. And I've just been asking some of the people anecdotally, what has it been like working from home? You know, how does it feel to people, good and bad? And it's quite dramatic, you know. I mean, I think things are really changing pretty fundamentally. I mean, a big part of the message is a lot of the people will not be coming back to work. I mean, full stop. You know, this is kind of, it's working for them. They really like it. It's kind of really easy to switch on. You just come downstairs just like I have, and on you are. It's sometimes less easy to switch off, which is a different issue. Lots of different things about using these sort of calls has popped up. One of the less obvious things that I've noticed is that apart from seeing the inside of many people's houses, you also get to see their family. So it's kind of a humanizing effect. If you remember recently, we talked about allowing our offices to bring their dogs into the office on a Friday as a sort of an idea, which is really catching on with a lot of our people. But this is much better now. We're bringing our family into work, so quite dramatic. So a lot of them will not be going back into the office, full stop. For our customers, it's pretty much the same. Large government departments, I think there are large private sector organizations, they're having to get their heads around the fact that, you know, for an awful lot of their people, there's just no need, you know, to go back into that that building. We used to spend a lot of time trying to persuade our customers that it's okay to work from home, we can be productive, and they would resist it. And we never got the chance for a lot of them to try it out. But now we've actually, in a really short space of time, we now have the evidence to show actually we can be even more productive. So, you know, we've crossed the Rubicon fully, and things are never going to be the same again. And, you know, I was chatting to one of our guys who's involved in this survey that we're doing. He said, yeah, that 9 to 5, forget that. You know, we're not getting stuck in traffic jams anymore. It's totally over, you know. And listening to those comments about rural Ireland and even that last video, I mean, I think just what's happened here now with COVID is the most amazing opportunity. It's just going to accelerate all these things that we've been talking about and hoping for, because what Conal's trying to do now with rural broadband, it's the same down here, you know, it's a big issue about the business case and could you justify it, and what about that last 20,000 least accessible. But it's just that argument is done. You know, if you don't have access from home, now you are disadvantaged hugely. You're putting yourself out of a big part of the job market. It's an equality issue, as Liv said it, but so it's not acceptable. It just won't be acceptable. And this is all happening kind of real time. It's very exciting in a way. And I think what you've shown, David, is, you know, in a kind of a strange way, the opportunities now, if you think about that, are going to be enormous, and you can be anywhere. So this whole migration from people commuting into the city centre in Dublin, where I live, from the suburbs, not needed. This whole migration from people from the countryside to the city. Why do you need that if you can get educated where you are and if you can get a job where you are? And actually what we've seen in the NHS now, you can see a GP and a specialist where you are. So it's all pretty dramatic and pretty exciting. I can't believe rural broadband is not going to happen now at pace. Really at pace now. And Conal, I hope you're the guy to do it, but yeah.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. The word you used more than any other was opportunity. You used opportunity 5 or 6 times in a couple of minutes there, and I think that's very interesting. And we'll come back to that after we've heard the last of our introductions from Richard Williams, Northern Ireland Screen. Richard, I don't want you to feel too daunted now following David's video from earlier on, but if you just talk us a little bit about NI Screen, what is the impact? I'm interested as well, is the impact of COVID on NI Screen, and how you guys see that opportunity as Paul describes it going forward. You're on mute at the minute, Richard.
Go for the traditional unmute delay. Yeah, well, it's, you know, Northern Ireland Screen is the screen agency for Northern Ireland. We're, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, we're best known for having a role in bringing Game of Thrones to Northern Ireland, which was for a decade the most successful TV show on the planet. Maybe more recently, for having a relationship with Dairy Girls, which has brought a lot of joy to Ireland and further afield. What's interesting about a lot of that development is that, you know, the headline issues historically were about physical infrastructure. So, I mean, obviously not exclusively, because people in every single industry are by far and away the most important thing. But, you know, the big limitation that we had to overcome was physical infrastructure, and we had to build a number of film studio complexes, which have been successfully built in Belfast over the last decade. We hope will grow further. But, you know, Northern Ireland Screen is broader than that. It's broader than an economic agency, and always was. We're equally interested in the obviously the economic value of the screen industries, but also the cultural value of the screen industries and the educational value that the screen industries can bring to society. And it's really interesting. You look at those 3 areas, and it's none of this is in the slightest complicated. You look at cultural value. People are, you know, rightly returning to public service broadcasting north and south of the border in Ireland. There's a realization of the importance of BBC and RTE, but reality, if you don't have iPlayer, or if you can't access Netflix, already mentioned, you are undoubtedly culturally diminished as a result. COVID has been brilliant for throwing into high relief, the realities of education. I live just outside of Hollywood. We have, by our standards, pretty good broadband, and there's an educational bounce, probably, I think, for my 12-year-old daughter in terms of experiencing all of this, and also critically continuing to do traditional schoolwork via the internet, but also utilizing the interesting things that it can do. So quite simply, those that don't have that access, they're not being educated. And then interestingly, the screen industries are much broader than just the big films and the big TV shows. We have, and we're delighted to have. I mean, the biggest growth area in the screen industries in Northern Ireland at the moment is the animation sector. The second biggest, and probably will overtake it within the next 12 months, the second biggest is the game sector. Those are the two sectors, again for pretty obvious reasons, that have been able to sustain their production model all through lockdown, because they're computer based. So again, look at that through the the prism of both economics and education. You're a kid somewhere that doesn't have decent broadband. Well, you are almost certainly not in the process of skilling yourself to work in those industries. If you live in a house that does not have decent broadband, you are not working on the latest animation project. You're not working on the latest game. And it's very interesting. One of our most exciting last couple of weeks, a company called Hypixel up in Derry was bought by Riot Games. Not a household name, but Riot Games is, as big as HBO in the games world, really. The guy that has set up that company is a guy from Derry. He's bringing the whole business back home, and that business is already multi-million, is going to be, a 100 million project very shortly. If his home had been, some townland that had no broadband, as opposed to Derry City, he wouldn't have been bringing it home. And that's a pretty stark. So, if you look at it through it doesn't matter whether you look at it through the economic value, the cultural, or the educational value. This is, there's a massive imperative to have, to have decent broadband, to the extent that I was going to say in the Western world, but that is maybe a patronizing statement. In fact, I think it certainly is a patronizing statement. When we are drifting very close to it being a kind of human right to have access to this sort of connectivity, because it's so clear that your opportunities, whether they are cultural, educational, or economic, are so significantly diminished by the lack of it.
Richard, thanks very much. That's very, very insightful, and that whole issue, even that investment that bringing Riots back to Derry and all the opportunities that'll flow from that. Exciting developments. David, I wonder, looking at your video, do people now regard a sort of a pre-broadband Skibbereen? Is there a before and after now? Is the transformation being as dramatic as that? The arrival of proper broadband?
It's a great question, but it's been massively accelerated, obviously, by lockdown. I mean, there's no question. A certain event like this, if we'd been having this conversation 6 months ago, it would have been interesting and theoretical, and I think it wouldn't have the urgency. And what Richard just said, the notion that it's a human right, has suddenly smacked us right in the jaw. It was a nice to have, and it's moved to a human right. That's a big shift. What is important to say, and I get across why Ludgate 2, because we realised that the breakdown for us really was the pipeline. we couldn't get our hands on the educational sector. I'm not criticizing anyone, it was just very difficult. So actually creating a pipeline meant creating connectivity, and we were hugely helped by UCC, very lucky. The deputy president of UCC gets it, and he's now on the Ludgate board. So creating these pathways, and then looking, of course, at teacher competence. We had really great teachers in a very traditional sense, but start talking to them about blended learning and the way in which they could take advantage of these opportunities, and the mist came down over their eyes. So that's a big part of this. So we have no illusions as to, I think, the answer to the question is, I think we probably didn't realize just how far back we were starting from. And it was only when we created Ludgate 1 that you began to understand that this is actually part of a journey. So any of us who are at the completion of Ludgate 1 said, whoa, and I had to wake up and realize, no, that was phase 1. I hope that makes sense.
Colin, it does indeed. Thank you, David. Colin, would you hear people talking about what was a luxury is now become a human right, and issues of equality and resilience are now being talked about in this conversation, whereas before you and I might have spoken about access to. Does that do you feel a responsibility? Does that make you feel even more?
Well, I'll tell you what I feel. It's when you hear this, you'd almost swear that fiber was like kryptonite, and it was this rare diamond stuff that you couldn't find anywhere on there. You know, it was some sort of weird rare substance that you can't get access to. Fiber's made from sand. It's silicate. Like it's half the price of copper. So the really, really interesting question for us is, why doesn't everybody have this already? Like having a fiber connection to every home and every premises is as simple as taking what looks like a kettle lead and plugging it into every building. And what we've essentially, the reason it hasn't happened is because what we've done in the 21st century is what we could be equated with in the 19th century, asking the canal companies to build the railways. You know, we've you know, the guys who we're asking to build the fiber networks, or who maybe we're expecting to build the fiber network, are the guys who are invested in the copper networks, and that gives that there's the business case for that is poor. So we think the thing that needs to be driven is competition. Competition is crucial. When we talk about platform competition, having network competition is absolutely essential, because if you don't do that, you don't create the dynamic for the replacement of the canals with the railways. So, you know, we can see today with Kate's broadband that she's on copper. Yeah. Where you can see that myself and David at least are on fiber. I think Paul's probably on fiber as well, knowing where he is. And you can see the difference in the quality. You know, it's absolutely central, and we can't, you know, we can't just expect that to happen naturally. You know, the only other way this gets done is if the infrastructure is state owned. So if this was electricity, the state would just write the check and build it, but it's not. Okay, and that's a whole different discussion. And you know, and you could argue that we should never privatize our telecoms. Like, I personally believe that's true, but it's done, and it's probably, you know, that's oil you can't get back out of the water for want of it. So if you then say, okay, well, we've privatized our phone networks. The phone companies are the canal companies, and we want to build railways. We shouldn't leave it to the canal companies to build the railways. We have to create a competitive dynamic.
Yeah. Kate, you're probably hearing stuff now that's, well, I was going to say music to your ears, but it's probably very frustrating for you to hear this talk as well, given that you're in a part of Northern Ireland which is a not spot. I just wonder, from what you've seen that happened in Skibbereen, does that give you any hope? And from what you hear from when you've chatted to Colin as well, does that give you any hope that a year or 3 or 4 years from now you will be in a better position?
So I know the Skibbereen project, and I know the Skibbereen project for 2 reasons. One, I have a sister who works in RTE who said, you need to see what they're doing in Skibbereen. We've just done a documentary on it. And 2, my mother's from North Cork, and we travelled to Skibbereen to see the Ludgate Hub a couple of years ago because we were so fascinated by what had happened. I also work with Rathlin Island, which is looking to be a carbon neutral island. It's the only inhabited island of Northern Ireland, and they're looking to be a carbon neutral island eventually. And they have been very interested in the whole Ludgate Hub idea, and they have been connecting in with Arranmore, which has just taken the blueprint from Skibbereen and taken it to Arranmore. And again, it's like if a rural area like Skibbereen and Arranmore and Rathlin can crack the fibre broadband accessibility, well, why can't Mahara and why can't Balik? And I suppose the thing for me is in listening to all of this, the frustration comes from the lack of a willingness in government's hands to see this as a utility and see this as a fundamental right. I think that will change. I do think we're at, as they describe it, the tipping point. I do think we're at that point where people begin to see the potential of this for connectivity and for to address social isolation and well-being, and that hits a number of targets for government. But I think from the...
Do you see that change, Kate?
Yeah, I do. I think when for the first time ever, we're talking Department for Communities, and when we talk about lack of access to broadband and digital divide, they're listening this time, whereas before it was a case of, and I want to be dead honest about this, an awful lot of our civil servants live in Belfast. They have no notion what it's like to live outside of a city with crappy broadband speed. So all of a sudden when I'm online and I'm screaming at teenagers to get off the internet to stop taking up my bandwidth, they for the first time are seeing the reality of being or having difficulty connecting. And I think the other thing is that they're trying to reach out beyond the community groups that they normally link with at this time, to ensure that they're not missing places, and the places that they realize the gaps are in are those places that are disconnected.
Yeah.
So the people who need the resources that they have most at this time are the furthest from those resources, because they are the most disconnected from the activity that has gone on, and all of the government resource and all of the government response has relied on online technology.
Thanks, Kate. There was sorry, Colin. Go ahead, Colin.
The one thing I'd say is that people, the homes and businesses in Northern Ireland are already spending enough on broadband to build fibre networks. They're just spending it in the wrong places, and that's it's not. We're not looking. There's an element of government support. That's what we just need to redivert the spend to the right places.
And Conal, I think there's a big issue here around money as well. I think when we look at Northern Ireland and we look at capital investment, and it's just exactly what you're saying. It's around, somebody needs to have the conversation at a very high level around how that investment could be matched with, and we talked about this, around corporate social responsibility, grants, additional investment and additional finance, which can come. And we've seen it in the COVID response. We have seen local businesses step up to talk about issues of disadvantage, vulnerability and inclusion. And local businesses have that switch on. And I would say that if we look at even unleashing the potential of our churches and our community halls to be hubs, there is no reason why we can't do this.
Yeah. Lisa, looking at the example that we saw in Skibbereen, there's very clear partnership, synergy between community-based organisations and the local private sector, the fledgling private sector perhaps. Yeah. In your work and in your organisation, do you see that synergy emerging between the business community and the community sector to try and address these kinds of problems?
Yeah, yes, is a short answer, but I think we'll see much more of that coming out, and whenever we move into the much longed for recovery phase from this pandemic, I think we're seeing that our businesses are starting to completely reassess what community means to them and what community means to their employees, because this whole pandemic has really shone a light on the gaps and the vulnerabilities that we have within our employees' communities and the places where people are living and trying to work and trying to do that from home. And we're seeing now member organisations say, actually, whilst it might be strategic for us to do something specifically focused on STEM, for example, and the careers within that, we still want to do that. We also know actually we need to look after our people and their communities and where they're from. And I think we'll see much more appetite there for partnership. And I think, we're already seeing, for example, we have a site called Skills Match, for example, where we match business skills and expertise with what local community group needs. But we're seeing lots of businesses we normally wouldn't have putting forward volunteers now saying, right, actually, we want to use our skills and use them in ways that really help communities at a grassroots level. So tell us what you need. The interesting part of this is we haven't had the requests coming through yet from the community and charitable sector. So there's a bit of those things have to come together and meet, and we're trying to get to the bottom of why that is happening. But we know that the need's there, and we have our businesses that want to offer their skills and work in partnership. So as Kate says, from our perspective, there's no reason why this can't happen. And Paul kept talking about opportunity. If we don't do this now, it's a shame on us, because this is the time, and there's a reason why the Department of Communities are really interested in all of this. because, as Kate says, all of the solutions, all of the ways forward, or the large majority of them, will be digital. We can't avoid that now. So there's a real opportunity, and we really have to pull together to make this happen.
Okay, that's great. Paul, you were mentioned by Lisa just a moment ago, and I wonder, from the private sector business, which is embedded in digital technology, it's what Kainos is all about. Has COVID, and as you did mention the work you were doing with NHS, for example, have you as a company switched to take a look around your own immediate environment and how better you might work with your local communities? Has that been part of your response to or reaction to COVID?
I don't know if we've managed to get our head up to look around anybody else. We've been so focused on sorting our own people out and sorting our customers out so far, but I'm sure that will be part of it. You know, I mean, I think we had planned to move into a new building in Belfast. I'm not sure what's going to happen to that. You know, do we really need a big central building anymore? We have a small office in Derry. I mean, we're sort of, I think when it comes to looking for future employees and future talent, it seems to me now we're more unconstrained.
Yeah.
You know, instead of having to think about our office hubs and where they might be and where we go to get talent, that's, you know, I think the educational centres becomes much more the location is less important now. It's more about skills. Yeah. So I think education needs to move much more to the fore now over time, because those other constraints will become less.
Yeah, it was interesting that coming out of the Ludgate project, David, along the bullet points of facts that were scrolling along the bottom of the screen, education was to the fore. You talked about children being able to stay in Skibbereen in West Cork to get their education. Job opportunities were there through education. That was clearly a big part of your drive as well.
It was. Also worth mentioning, Brendan, that there were several surprises, and this was a remarkable one. You saw some clips there of the digital week we ran. And we had a spare day, and of course this is a farming community, so we decided to have a day for young farmers farming. And I don't think many of us thought it would be that well attended. In fact, it was the most well attended of the whole week. It was packed. Why? Because they understood the relationship between digital and yield. They got it. You didn't have to explain anything complicated. They immediately understood it, and that was quite, I mean, I was gobsmacked. No, I don't think any of us expected that. Can I raise one other thing? I'll be careful what I say here, because this may end up going broadly online. Politics, the P word. If you look at the recent elections here, you might notice, if you look down in West Cork, a huge change has taken place in terms of who the TDs are there. They're Social Democrats, Independents, everything else. It's because they were pushing this issue at the time that the traditional parties, well, ignored it effectively, and it turned into a real electoral issue, and it's ended up literally at the Doyle with people to whom this is food and drink, and that then reverberates out of an extra thing, which I think is exciting, and David knows about this. We had a little crisis here, which was Cork County Council's view was jobs are jobs. Any jobs you can get is great, and we got stuck with at one point. It looked as though a plastics factory. The last thing in the world we needed here was a plastics factory. Within days, we raised 50,000 euros, went to judicial review and won. Now, those things have given a confidence to this community, which is quite extraordinary. We're not victims. We're not sitting around waiting for Cork County Council to decide on planning zones. We're not sitting around waiting for the government. And so it believes in itself, this community. And I think, Kate, you would have, hopefully, you'd have picked that up. So these things may sound unconnected, but they're actually quite intimately connected.
And I think we're seeing that, David. We look at things like the Grow Remote project, where you see, and Paul, it would be really interesting for you to have a look. I don't know if you're aware of the Grow Remote project, but where independents, people who work from home, we have one woman that we're friendly with who lives in Ballina, and she is doing accounts for a firm in New Zealand. She moved back from New Zealand. They didn't want to lose her as their accountant. She's still doing the accounts at night for the firm in New Zealand, but she's living in Ballina or outside of Ballina. And all around in a scrolling direction, all of those, that Grow Remote project is about connecting lone workers or home workers right across the western seaboard of Ireland. And we're looking at that because what we're seeing is the unleashing of that potential. And it's exactly what David says. It's this idea that we're growing the confidence of communities, the abilities of communities. It increases the democratic dialogue, it increases civic responsibility, but it also increases this ability to stay in a place and grow your place. And in Ireland, and in Northern Ireland in particular, place is hugely important to people. Where you're from, how you're connected, where you're connected to. So we have people who travel very long distances into their jobs, and they will commute long distances on low wages in for jobs. And actually, if we can bring the jobs to the people rather than the people to the jobs, that is a massive change that then unleashes the potential of many of our rural areas to be these hubs and drivers for change for themselves. And I think that potential is what we really don't want to lose. And digital isn't the only answer, but it is part of the solution.
Guys, we're probably heading towards the tail end of our conversation. But Richard, I wanted to bring you back in again. Part of your work brings you into interactions with government departments here. And I wonder, do you detect an acknowledgement or an appreciation of the importance of digital technology across Northern Ireland amongst our political parties and political representatives at the moment?
Well, I think maybe like everybody else, if you'd asked me that pre-COVID, I would have said maybe not. You know, there was a little bit of the fetishization of the kind of fat pipe to America kind of approach to it, which is almost the opposite of the reality of what's really required. But I think now, you know, it's been said already, people are facing into the everyday examples of people breaking up on Zoom calls. You know, they're hearing all of that. So I suppose my answer to you is no, not really. But this is the moment and the platform upon which to actually lift this up. I think one of the challenges our government now, I suspect most governments aren't actually very good at things that have cross-cutting value.
Yes.
Which is sort of counterintuitive, because the things that have cross-cutting value should be the things of greatest value. But we have consistently had a challenge to exacerbated in Northern Ireland context, but not specific to it, where things that are really important across a wide range of issues tend not to get focused upon, because we're very focused on departmental structures and no individual department would get this over the line on its own. So I think the challenge is to use the platform of lockdown and to try and build the broadest of consensus, because it's not just a communities issue, it's not just an economy issue, it's not just an education issue, it's all of those things.
Yeah, look, we're probably in this on this call. We're probably a group of natural optimists. So I'm going to go around the screen and ask people for a one-sentence answer. Conal, starting with you, do you have confidence that Northern Ireland as a region has the people and potentially has the digital infrastructure to make a real success of this region, inspired by the kind of stuff we saw in West Cork?
So in one sentence quickly, yes, I have absolute confidence that we have the people and the projects that can deliver and maximize on the economic development in Northern Ireland, way ahead of other areas. We also have the pieces of the infrastructure jigsaw on the table. It's not absolutely clear that we're putting them together yet, but that's the single biggest unlocker of the potential. And then if we do that there, Northern Ireland will go from towards the back of the class to right to the top of the class.
That's where we ought to be. Lisa, do we have the potential?
We absolutely have the potential, and we also need the tenacity and powers of persuasion to make sure that we can get councils and government departments to look at this as a regional plan and a plan for us, and that's a whole different conversation, but look at the prosperity across the province as a key part of that. That's how we'll make this work.
Okay, brilliant. Kate?
Exactly what Lisa said. I wouldn't add anything to that. It's exactly what she said.
Okay, good. Paul?
Yeah, I mean, just the comment about people in Northern Ireland, because I've been with Kainos now for over 20 years. I mean, the talent in education is exceptional. It's not just ordinary. So it's absolutely not a limiting factor.
Okay, that's brilliant. And Richard?
We'll look at it at an individual level. You know, people, companies, of course. There's no doubt that we have the capacity and the capability. I think what I hope for out of COVID, that I've only seen a few times in the last decade in Northern Ireland, is that
I hope this is taken to be a big enough crisis that we actually, form ourselves into a kind of coherent leadership, proposition that really goes as far as we possibly can.
Okay, brilliant, Richard. And David, I'm going to finish with you now. As someone who doesn't live here, but I think you're a supporter of us up here, and you wish as well. So, do you have the same optimism that the rest of the people on the call share?
Well, I've been coming to Northern Ireland for 58 years, so in a funny way, maybe the oldest person on the call. And I've never doubted the energy level, and I've always loved the place. I'd say two things. I think that we're looking back at what Keynes said, in immediate after the Second World War, when he was asked about house building, and someone said you can't afford it. And he said, you don't build houses with money, you build houses with bricks. That's what you. I think that's interesting. Is there's a realization that money is there to do things with. That may sound ridiculous, to do things with, and the degree of debt is such that when you then begin to scan us, what's the most useful thing to do with this thing called money, because we're going to do something with it, the answer becomes, I think, increasingly obvious. And that's where I see hope. And I think probably that's exactly what Richard's saying.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much, David. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining the conversation. We've been chatting for an hour now. The time has flown by. And thanks, Kainos and Fibrus, for facilitating the conversation in the first place, folks. We stay in touch with each other. We keep the conversation going. Thanks very much for all of your time.